prone. They had a few young players coming in like Timo Werner and others who hadn't played on that big of a stage. And then you couple in the fact that there's no real powerful leader like a Bastian Schweinsteiger or a Philipp Lahm in that squad. And I think you put all those pieces together, along with the fact that just tactically they didn't really seem to be that cohesive. And I think it's really no surprise that they're out. I mean, that last game encapsulated it. 31 crosses to basically nobody in the box. Werner was drifting out wide, inside, which was very strange to see for Germany center forward. And Toni Kroos and as well as the German defense were completely overrun on counterattacks. They were two of the most bypassed players in the group stage. And when you see them play, I don't think it was really much of a surprise to see that, because whether it was Sweden or South Korea or Mexico, they just had the same strategy of just passing it through their high line and getting in on goal, and it seemed to work.
Yeah. But in terms of the points you just mentioned, though, would it have been a matter of personnel or how the personnel was deployed, because or a combination of both? Because you mentioned some of the names, and they retained a number of the players that they had from their World Cup winning team in 2014. But as you said, there were some new additions in terms of Timo Werner and so on. And there was also issues with goalkeeper Manuel Neuer, who was out for an extended period of time before coming back. So you think it's a matter of personnel, or how the personnel were deployed, or a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. When you see a country like Germany struggle like that, and when you see them get knocked out in the group stage, then I think it has to be both. And I know some people might be launching an inquest into whether or not the system is broken. I think that's a bit too far. I think it's just a case of this happens, and they just need to do a better job of getting that team integrated. Because whether it was the injuries or the suspensions in the case of Jerome Boateng at center back, that didn't have a lot of consistency. Toni Kroos was playing with either Sami Khedira or Sebastian Rudy, who got that unfortunate injury in the second game. There was just no real consistency with the 11, and it almost looked like Joachim Löw, the coach, of course, didn't really try to deviate away from what clearly wasn't working. He was leaving a lot of space in the middle, as I mentioned, and there was really no real need or really any impetus to change it. It was almost like, well, it's fine, we're Germany, we're going to eventually get through this. And in the case of the Sweden game, they obviously did, thanks to some brilliance from Kroos. But I personally think that maybe playing in more of a 4-3-3 with, let's say, Goretzka, and even if you want to throw in Khedira, that's fine. I don't think Khedira personally is good enough to play at the highest level anymore, at least for Germany. But if you were to have played a 4-3-3, I think maybe that wouldn't have left them so exposed on the counterattack. But the fact that Löw didn't seem to want to change, I think really was their ultimate undoing.
Yeah. You think maybe lacked a bit of directness too, because I think that's what I heard some of the pundits saying in terms of, you mentioned Werner drifting out wide, and that was very unusual to see from a German centre forward. That directness and that type of a goal poacher that we would have seen over the years from a Miroslav Klose, that was lacking as well.
I think so, yeah. And look, Werner is obviously a very talented striker. If anybody's ever watched him play in the Bundesliga, he's a very clinical finisher. He scores basically a goal every other game with RB Leipzig. I think a little bit, too, the system maybe wasn't necessarily tailored to his strengths. He's someone who is obviously very used to playing on the break, on the counter, making those runs off the shoulder of the last defender. And I think because Germany, because they were basically facing teams that were bunkering down and trying to frustrate them, I don't think you necessarily saw the best out of him. And maybe one possible solution to solving that issue was maybe pairing him with a Mario Gomez, someone who could be a bit more of a reference point. That way, if you have Werner making those runs out wide or off the ball, he had someone to cross it into, which we did see against Sweden, assisting the first goal for Germany. But that was certainly a massive issue. But of course, in the case of an elimination like this, it does go from top to bottom across the squad and the coaching staff as well.
All right, so we're going to break down the round of 16, but before we even get to that, in terms of the matchups, in the round of 16, I want to talk about one of the other major talking points of the 2018 FIFA World Cup, and that's the video assistant referee And for obvious reasons, it's the first time that this has been used at a major tournament. There are some leagues around the world that have still resisted the introduction of the VAR, but FIFA had decided to go ahead with it ahead of the World Cup, and they have FIFA themselves and the referees committee chairman thinks that the VAR has worked very well. What are your thoughts on the VAR?
See, I was very much pro VAR entering the tournament. Anybody who has covered, and I do cover Major League Soccer, we are used to it over here because it's been in place for now. This is the second season. I think for the most part, the decisions have been correct, but I think that the controversy is brought about by they're using video review for what are very subjective decisions. Because one person might say, well, this handball is clear and obvious, but then the other might say, well, I don't think it is. And I think a perfect example might have been, say, the Morocco-Portugal game, or any of those incidents in Group B, really, or the match that just happened with Senegal and Colombia, that last tackle by Davinson Sanchez. I was looking at my Twitter timeline, and it was pretty much 50-50. Some thought that it was a great tackle by Sanchez. Others thought that he fouled Mane on the way to goal. Yet video review, after the penalty was awarded, they overturn it, which basically says it's a clear and obvious error and that Davinson Sanchez's tackle was clean. And that's what I think the problem is that it's not so much video review that's the problem, but I think that depending on the referee, whether they are good or bad, they're going to make inconsistent decisions no matter what. It's just that with video review, the controversy is a bit raised, and I think this is the problem with it in general. People expect all controversy to be removed 100%, but in a subjective sport like football, I don't think that will entirely be removed. But for the most part, I think they've gotten most of the crucial decisions correct, and I think that's pretty important, and we should focus on that.
Yeah. And I guess, as you mentioned, though, that, my only thing with the VAR is that if you accept it, there are proponents and there are detractors, but if you accept it, what you need to also accept, as you've alluded to, is that it's never ever going to be 100% correct. So some people will say, well, if it's not 100% correct, don't use it. But I think it's here to stay. You have to accept it because I don't think FIFA will ever stop the use of it going forward. It's here to stay. So I think once you know that it's being used, don't expect 100% of the decisions to be correct.
I think that's the way to go, yes. And I think that's what a lot of people seem to look at, because when you look at video reviews in, say, other sports like rugby, or if you want to use an American sport like American football, where there is black and white in that, okay, well, it's either this decision or that decision. But when it comes to football, association football, and whether it's a handball or this is a foul, that is a foul, you can really use any sort of argument. Now, of course, there will always be these decisions where people will say, well, that's incorrect, but I think at least for the very obvious decisions, which, if you look at, for me anyways, that foul on Antoine Griezmann against Australia, I think that was very clearly a foul. He was impeded from going into the box and having a shot. Those kind of decisions being correct, I think, really helps the sport. Yes, you're going to miss one or two every now and then, but as long as you get most of them, I think fans should be pretty satisfied with it.
Yeah. All right, let's look now at the round of 16 matchups. Brazil, Mexico.
I think the right call here, I think, would be Brazil, just based on the fact that they are Brazil, and Mexico, as we saw in the Sweden game, they were a mess. But then Brazil as well, much like France, much like Uruguay and Portugal as well. In fact, none of these teams have really hit their peak yet. You get the sense that there's still a bit more from Brazil, that they can go up another gear. Felipe Coutinho's been outstanding, no question about it. I think he's been their best player. I think Neymar had his best performance in the final game against Serbia. He was much more involved centrally, which was a problem in their first two games. I think he was maybe hugging the touchline a bit too much. But Mexico also has the ability to counter very, very effectively. I think Hector Herrera in the middle of the pitch has been one of Mexico's best players. Their center back, Carlos Salcedo, has been very solid. The one real Achilles heel, though, for Mexico, I think might be the right side. Edson Alvarez plays on right back again, because he was susceptible on at least 2 of those Sweden goals. He got his positioning all wrong. It's not a real surprise because he is a center back and he's not too used to playing on the right flank. So there are going to be some growing pains there. But I think that could be an area for Brazil to exploit, especially with Neymar on that side and Coutinho tending to drift to that left wing as well. So I would give the edge to Brazil. But again, Mexico does have the potency, especially on the break, to be able to exploit that back line, especially if they're pushing up their fullbacks.
Yeah. Well, I can't disagree with you there. And based on Mexico, as you said, their final group game performance not inspiring a lot of hope going forward, and Brazil certainly looking more polished the further they go in the competition. Belgium versus Japan. The Belgians winning their final group game against England, topping their group, and with a host of changes for the Belgian team, still managing to get the better of a pretty decent England team, and Japan, of course, coming off a loss in their final group match.
Yeah, and they also made, I believe it was 6 changes to their 11 in that final game as well. So this is maybe going to be a case of either 2 very well-rested teams or 2 very rusty teams. Still give the slight edge to Belgium because the way they set up in their 3-4-3, I think they're built to counter, and Japan does like to have possession and to be able to control the game. And I think that's where Belgium might be able to exploit them a little bit, especially with, Dries Mertens and Eden Hazard and Romelu Lukaku being incredibly clinical so far at this World Cup. That's going to be the key. And then, of course, Kevin De Bruyne as well, who's magnificent in every single way as well. But the only real way I could see Japan possibly getting past them is maybe possibly exploiting the center backs. They have looked a bit shaky whenever teams have tried to run at them, and I think Japan does have the necessary tools to do that, as well as out wide. We saw against Senegal, when Senegal pushed up their fullbacks, Japan just basically targeted those wings, got the ball long to whoever was up front, and then just cut inside, shot, and usually ended up scoring from it. So that's the one area I could see Japan possibly profiting from against Belgium.
Yeah. Then on the other side, Spain versus Russia.
I think Spain should be able to get the job done here. They as well have not looked particularly convincing. Sergio Ramos and David De Gea have been very shaky, no doubt about it. And the fact that Russia, with Golovin, with Cherchev, have been very good going forward, they could possibly cause some problems, much like Morocco did in that final game, much like basically every team did, I think, in Group B as well. But you get the sense that with Spain being able to control possession and with the team a little bit rested as well, you would assume that they will be able to click and be able to get past Russia, get into the quarterfinals, especially if Isco and Andres Iniesta continue to click together, because they've been magnificent to watch. They've probably been their 2 best players thus far at the tournament.
Yeah. Croatia, Denmark.
Giving the edge to Croatia because of the midfield battle. I think Denmark's defense has been maybe a tad overrated. They have conceded basically around 15, 16 shots a game, but Kasper Schmeichel's made outstanding saves. Andreas Christensen, has made some very good last-ditch tackles, along with Simon Kjaer as well, his center-back partner. Croatia, we all know that their midfield is probably, you could argue, the best at the tournament, with Rakitic, Modric, and Brozovic. Perisic is scoring goals out wide, cutting inside as well. I would very much favor Croatia to get through, especially because their defense, which I thought would actually be a bit of an Achilles heel for them, have been very strong, led by Domagoj Vida and Dejan Lovren as well.
Yeah. Sweden, Switzerland?
I'm giving the slight edge to Sweden because I think, unlike Denmark, they actually do have a very strong defense, a very compact defense. And Emil Forsberg, at least against Mexico, which I think is a great sign for Sweden, looked very lively in that open space. And that's what I think Sweden needs. They need him to really be the leader on those counterattacks and just the leader overall in the final third. Switzerland, very stingy as well, no question about it. I mean, if you can hold off Brazil, then I think you deserve a lot of credit. But I do wonder if, because Sweden won't give them as much space to counter into like Serbia did in that second game, I wonder if maybe that's Switzerland's undoing. So I would favor Sweden slightly to get through.
Yeah, and the final one, Colombia versus England.
This one is probably the toughest to call for me, just because it all really depends on James Rodriguez's fitness. We saw him limp off in that last group game against Senegal. If he's fit, give this slight edge to Colombia, because I think with Quintero and James and Cuadrado as well, I think they have the ability to be able to break down England's defense. I expect England to maybe allow Colombia to have more of the ball, so that in there, much like with other teams in the tournament who play a similar system like Belgium, they're going to want to sit back and then maybe hit you on the counter, especially at wide. But I do expect Colombia to be able to get past that stingy defense, test Jordan Pickford, and maybe edge England in the round of 16 to get into that quarterfinal against either one of Sweden or Switzerland.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter, for your top-class analysis.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for having me on.